So briefly, I want to talk about a few high-level topics that we noted in Professor Aga's written report. The first one is infrastructure financing districts. So the report makes an assertion that infrastructure financing districts are a, quote, risky and usually unsuccessful method to provide sports subsidies. This one was a bit of a head scratcher for me, as IFDs are a fairly recent creature of California law. They have been used less than a dozen times, all in the last decade, and to my knowledge have never been considered and certainly never utilized as a method to provide sports subsidies anywhere in the state. In this case, the ballpark would be privately financed, constructed, and operated, so very different than the deal structure that we're all familiar with at the Coliseum. The city has never considered, nor have the A's ever requested the IFD to finance or subsidize the ballpark. The IFD would be used to reimburse the A's for their costs of building on-site public infrastructure and parks. So we're talking about streets, sidewalks, parks, park benches, trees, sewers, electrical lines, etc. That would be public property and would be constructed by the developer at the developer's own expense. So Professor Aga noted the term eligible public infrastructure. That's a term that comes directly from the state law. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about eligible public infrastructure, and those who are knowledgeable about IFDs will, or who have sat through boring presentations that I've given previously, will know that all of the infrastructure to be reimbursed needs to be specified in something called an infrastructure financing plan, which would be coming to the city council for approval with all of the detail about what the maximum reimbursement would be and for what purposes those reimbursements would be made. But the bottom line with an IFD is that all of the risks associated with funding on-site infrastructure, including delays, cost increases, cost overruns, scope changes, the dirt was dirtier than we thought it was, would be borne by the developer, because it is their responsibility to build and install all of that infrastructure, and they would only be reimbursed to the extent there is tax increment available after the private investment has been made, after buildings which create tax increment have been completed and occupied and placed on the tax rolls. So this is not a, we hope that tax increment might be created. This is, buildings have been built, tax increment is in place, and now we are going to use a portion of it to reimburse the developer for that investment in public infrastructure and parks. And finally, I would note that IFDs have been successfully used in this way, including in our own backyard quite recently for the Mission Rock project, which the professor inaccurately noted is not a beneficiary of this type of financing. In fact, they are, and the Treasure Island project.